Hello, sparkly beans. This is just going to be a little quick hit video because I just had this idea randomly, or experience really, and thought, this would be an interesting little reflection. So if you're new here, my name is Avery, and I help folks who are passionate about liberation and justice to find themselves and their roles in an emerging future. And one of the ways I do that is with the tarot, and I love to geek out about tarot. So this is going to be a video for the tarot folks. I was just working with this deck. This is the Cosmic Slumber by Tillie Walden. And, you know, I've come across Tillie's comics in the past and wanted to support them. I'll just show some cards while I talk, in case this deck is of interest. But this is really just an example to talk a little bit about my approach to deciding whether to keep decks and to culling or decluttering or whatever you want to call it. So it wasn't directly inspired by, but I'll mention it's kind of in the same spirit of I just watched a video by Dawn Michelle at Holler Tarot about her approach and sort of the kinds of reasons that she might call, and in a similar spirit, at some point I might do a video. I might have you all join me as I actually, maybe I'll even do it live, that could be fun, as I call my obviously large collection here, but I think it's kind of fun or interesting to me anyway to think about the, I'm actually going to hold that aside as an example, the philosophical side of it, the reasoning, the why. So, okay, I'm going to put this down because it's distracting me. So that's some sample of Cosmic Slumber. So what I'm going to be talking about here is actually like getting to know decks and deciding, particularly deciding whether to let go of decks that I haven't worked with that much. So, or making a decision on whether to keep, you know, a deck that's come into my collection. So this is a little different from Dawn Michelle talked about decks that she's worked with a lot. So I have, you know, my decks all on these shelves, and then the like top and then part of the second to top shelf that actually have decks on them are the ones that I'm not like immediately sure of. Either yes, this is a deck I work with and use and love, or this is a deck that that like I know I'm so excited about that it's certainly not going away anytime soon. I actually what I decided to, so for a long time I didn't have like a separate area for the unsure decks, and I decided to do that because I realized that I wasn't like, I just wasn't reaching for every deck in my collection, and so there were decks where it was like, well, I've never worked with you, so I don't know if I would want you. And this is obviously like a certain amount of privilege I have to be able to buy and acquire these decks. So I want to make that clear whenever I talk about decks that, you know, if you're not able to have a large collection, like you need a tarot deck to read tarot. So I just like disclaimer, just, take that into account. But and even decks that I was really excited about receiving, like I wasn't always remembering to work with. So in a conversation with my friend Jenna, some of you may know from the it's not active anymore, but the Leo Rising podcast, or Jenna is I believe currently handle on Instagram is Autistic Hedge Witch. Awesome follow. But Jenna and I were talking, and at one point about deck collections, and I decided to pull out based on, basically it was like, I'm trying to remember the exact criteria, but as I recall, it was either is the deck a good friend, like do I relate to the deck as a good friend, as a what I think of as like an old friend. So kind of in contrast to how Dawn Michelle talked about it, there are definitely decks that like I used for a long time that I'm not currently using, but I definitely don't want to get rid of them. So those are kind of the old friends. They have meaning to me and I'm going to keep them. So it was like good friend or current friend, you know, old friend. And then kind of is it like a crush? Is it a strong crush? You know, maybe I haven't worked with it much, or maybe I haven't worked with it before. Or, and I don't have a cutesy name for this, but you know, it doesn't have a specific purpose in my collection. So is it a deck for that maybe I don't use a lot, but it has a very specific role. And anything that I could not consider one of those, it was like, no shade, I'm just going to put you separate, and I'm going to try to work with you. So what I've started doing, and the Cosmic Slumber is an example of this, is I've started using those decks in a new practice I'm doing that I don't want to talk too much about because, yeah, it's just, I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but a really regular card pulling practice that I'm doing because it gives me an opportunity to see a lot of the cards, to work with the deck a lot. And you know, at first I almost had this like little hesitation because I was like, well, if I'm going to be doing this practice, you know, like every day or every week, do I really want to use a deck I don't know that well? But it's like, you know, you're never gonna touch the damn thing if you don't do it. So that's what I've been doing. And so I've been working for the past week with this one. Whoop, I'm gonna throw cards on the floor. And I just had this realization because you know, throughout the week I've been kind of feeling like, yeah, I think I am going to let this one go. You know, it's not that it's, you know, like, it's not that it's not, and this was the revelation I had, right, is that it's not that it's a bad reader. In fact, I just did a one-off spread with this deck, and it was really good, right? And I think in the past, I would have, so here's the point. I think in the past, I would have probably kept the deck because I would have thought of it as a good reader. So I don't know if you've ever, you know, you ever use that term of like, this is a good reader, this deck is a really clear reader. Although in this case, I don't know if I would say, I don't know if clear reader is the term I would use, but it was more just like, the cards that I pulled, the cards, not the images necessarily, but like the cards that I pulled, which ones they were, right, for coming out of my interpretations in my brain, were right on target. And I think historically I would have said, oh, this deck is like good at communicating with me. And the shift is that I've come to realize, and this was actually like a realization I had earlier, but it's really like coming into practical use now. But the realization I had that even led me to start to think about culling decks was that, you know, the deck isn't the magic I am. And that's not to say that I don't, because I do very much experience my decks as friends, as kind of like familiars, as having their own personalities. And I do think that like different decks communicate in different ways. And I do have a certain level of spiritual sort of belief that as magical tools, as, how do I say this? That like the creator, there's this alchemy, I think, between the creator's process of committing these cards to image, and then each individual deck, like not just like this is the Cosmic Slumber, but also this Cosmic Slumber is a copy of it, right? I think there's also something there in like the individual who connects with this copy, and then my own magic. So I do think that there is like an alchemy there where there is something in the deck, but at the same time, I don't think anymore, my worldview isn't really that, or I guess I should say my cosmology here, is not really that it is that the quote-unquote like clear cards or the right cards or the matching or whatever comes up because of the deck necessarily. Now what I do think is that like when I have a really good connection with the deck, or the deck's language is very resonant with my channel and with my guides and with my magic, that may allow for or give possibility for certain messages in a different way. So in other words, the visuals, the specific imagery, the cards that I'm pulling, absolutely, I find, can allow for different messages to come through and can enable, not in a like enable or bad way, but like allow for it, facilitate particular readings in a really beautiful way. And that is part of how I do connect to decks. And I think the different decks may give different entities kind of ability to come through. So like I have a deck I use to work with the land, for example, that I think because it's the Pacific Northwest Tarot, because it is related to this land, it has that relationship, right? It has the vocabulary that comes through. But what I noticed when working with this was that, again, I was coming to the interpretations in my head. I think that, with all respect to this lovely deck, because I think it's a lovely deck and it's been doing great for me, and I thanks deck, that it's not because of this deck that I had that very sparkly reading. It's because of, you know, where I am right now in my intuition and my channel, and that this deck is working as a perfectly good communicator of that. But noticing that I wasn't really looking at the images, and then looking at the images and going, yeah, I mean, these images communicate the meaning, but not necessarily any better or any differently than other decks in my collection. I think that's the other thing, is like, if you do have a larger collection, you've probably experienced this, where different decks can serve a similar purpose, and you start to kind of notice like, oh, I'd rather bond with and get to know a deck, you know, or a smaller number of decks than be constantly cycling. And so because this doesn't specifically spark anything in me, and also it's not necessarily my art style, but that wouldn't be a barrier if like otherwise it really you know, it really landed. But I think, why not rehome this, and why not pass it on? By the way, if you want this deck, you know, if you'd like to buy or trade for this deck, feel free to leave me a comment and we can chat. Otherwise, I'll probably just post it at some point in a Facebook group. But oh yeah, I left this one out. Actually, I don't know if this is meaningful necessarily. Oh, I didn't even notice. That's so funny, because now I'm like talking about giving away this deck and I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I didn't notice there's a little person. This is the Ace of Pentacles. If you look real careful, a little person that I didn't notice before. So I pulled this as a repeater, and so this was, I think when I pulled this as a repeater this week, it was kind of like, oh, like, is there something in the image? And so now I'm like, oh, maybe there was a little. But again, like, not letting, I think that's sort of the little like monkey mind going, but what if there's something, right? There's always going to be a little voice that goes like, if you give it away, what if there was a reason not to? And like, that's just not it's not spirit talking to me. That's my monkey mind. So anyway, just a quick reflection. I'd be curious, you know, if that lands for anybody, and if you do have like a larger collection, if that's an experience you have. I mean, it doesn't have to be as big as mine, but you know, just like more than a few decks. You know, is that something that resonates with you? Do you find that certain decks read better, you know, for you, or read clearer, and what does that look like for you? Feel free to leave me a comment below, and yeah, I expect I will be doing more deck videos. I'm kind of, in some ways, rethinking the role of this YouTube channel. but more on that later. Anyway, if you find you know, my content helpful and useful and valuable to you, and you have the capacity to do so, I'll just remind you that there is a Patreon link below that you're welcome to come support. I am actually thinking about like whether to continue YouTube or like how much to continue YouTube, and so it really does make a difference to have some support there. And then also, completely free, I have a newsletter below. So if you're interested in hearing from me, especially if I am doing YouTube less frequently, I will continue to do the newsletter more or less every week. So you'll find that link below as well. Okay, hope you have a great day.